The first step in the disassembly process for the differential is to check if there is oil inside. We can see this done here by a young gentleman as he loosens the bolt off the back to check inside the differential for any oil. We can see here he has removed the bolt, and we can see inside there is no oil. Life pro tip. One of the holes where you attach the wheel is bigger than the others, and as such is big enough to fit a sprocket through to loosen the nuts on the axle. And here we see a montage of the use of a straight socket and a normal socket to undo the nuts that hold the axle in place, as this is the next step of the disassembly process. And here we see the soft hammer being used by two strapping young lads to remove the axles from the differential to complete the process. Here we see them stored separately from each other. And this here is a montage of the use of a sprocket to remove the nuts from the front of the differential so as to remove the differential housing. Here we see the housing being removed, and make sure you collect all 5 of the washers from the front of the differential, as they will fall off and you will lose them. The next step of the process is to remove the locking bolt from the locking bearing thing. So we see here the use of a sprocket and then later the hand being used to remove these locking nuts so as to complete the next step of the disassembly process. Now one must use a specialized tool to remove the bearing lock. This tool is really just a bent piece of metal, but we call it a specialized tool, and you remove the lock bearing by simply turning it, and it will unscrew as a result of being turned. And we can see here that it simply comes out and store it on its respective side. Yes, keep the left nut on the left and the right on the right. This will avoid confusion and getting your parts mixed up in the process. Next, you want to remove the bearing cap. This is completed by simply loosening the 2 bolts along the top and then pulling it off, as demonstrated here. We can see a sprocket being used to loosen them off, and this, I believe, is the 16mm sprocket. So we can see here that the sprocket is being removed. Not the sprocket, the bearing cap is being removed and the bolts loosened. And as shown here, we can see that sometimes the bearing comes out with the cap. This is perfectly fine, and in fact ensures that the process will not take quite as long. If this does not happen, there is nothing wrong with your ability to disassemble a differential. It is simply that the dice did not roll that way. Here we see the process being repeated, using the 16mm sprocket to undo the bolts, as Marley very aggressively attacks the bolt heads. Here we see this time the bearing did not come off with the cap, and this is fine. It is not an impact on how your ability is. And now simply use your hands to remove the differential itself from the casing, and there we have a disassembled differential from the HQ Holden. Next video will show how to reassemble the differential.